why are we born into sin? So like, why is every person that's born with a sinful nature, or evil nature, a nature that makes them fallen from grace, makes them, turn from the face of God, makes them turn away from their heavenly creator, which is God our Father. So why are we born into sin? So for this section, I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Verse 1 says, "The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden?'" So what I want y'all to understand from even just that verse is that sin came about. We all know the eventual result of the story of Adam and Eve. But sin came about because of a question that questioned the command that God had already given them. So if something in your life questions something that you know to be true, that God is telling you to do, that something that God commands you not to do, and it questions that, it's important that we cast down those thoughts. It's important that we cast down those questions, because they can lead to, as you can see, the destruction of humanity. If you want to just make it personal, the destruction of yourself, because we know that in the word sin, it leads to destruction, it leads to death. The wages of sin is death. So that means that, the payment for sin, the check that you get for sinning is death. So we have to be mindful of that. Verses 2. "Of course we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden," the woman replied. "It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat. God said you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die." "You won't die," the serpent replied to the woman. "God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil." The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it too. At that moment, their eyes were open, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. So we see in this, section of the word that they fell into sin because of the trick of the enemy, the trick of Satan, that, he used the snake to ask them these questions and to inform them that, hey, you can be like God, knowing both good and evil. Which was not true in that case. Although we should understand, like, when the enemy comes, he's never going to allow you to understand things from a spiritual standpoint, because in the spirit realm, we know that God prevails. We know that Jesus Christ is our intercessor, and we know that God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The enemy, a lot of times, is going to come to your flesh. He's going to come to your carnality. He's going to come to the feeling that you get when you want to do something wrong. The feeling that you get when you see a nice looking man or a nice looking woman. That feeling or that thought that comes in your head, like, hey, I want that person. Or the thought that you get, or the feeling that you get when somebody says something wrong to you, or says that you did something that you didn't do. That feeling or that thought that you get to either knock their head off or say something crazy to them. That feeling that you get, he's going to appeal to that. He's going to appeal to that so that you can move in your flesh, and you won't acknowledge God. You won't acknowledge, hey, God, should I do this? You won't acknowledge, hey, God, I know you tell me, not to fall in this way, or not to, take part in this thing. He wants you to just act. He wants you to just move in the realm of evil. So we see that Adam and Eve moved in that realm of evil. But what I also want you guys to see is that it says the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So instead of being obedient to God and seeing the inheritance and the blessing, they weren't in lack, y'all. They could eat from every tree in the garden except for one tree. So the devil, a lot of times when he comes, and like when we're studying these scriptures, I want y'all to always see the repetitiveness of God's character. I want y'all to see the repetitiveness of God's character and the enemy's character, so that we could pinpoint it in our lives, so that we'll know when this happens, hey, that's not of God. Hey, that's the enemy talking, or hey, that's God talking. The thing about it, the woman was convinced And she lusted after the fruit because she began not to focus on the things that God had already promised her, but she began to focus on the things that she didn't have, the thing that God had told her not to partake in. And a lot of times you can even see that in kids. You know, you tell them you're going to go upstairs and you're going to go do whatever you're doing, and that they're going to be left alone. And you tell them, hey, do not touch these cookies on the stove. But that sinful nature and not just necessarily in kids, but just in humans in general, it's like they have everything they need. They have everything they could ever desire in God, but we always want that thing that we shouldn't have. We always yearn after that thing we shouldn't have, but that's because of our sinful nature. So we have to be mindful of that. So this is the story of why we are born into sin. We're born into sin because of disobedience. We're born into sin because of lust. Okay, so I want to give you guys an example. I think I heard this from Nick Jones, and shout out to Nick Jones. I watch him a lot. He's I seen God move in his life on YouTube as well, and it kind of encourages and inspires you to keep going in your walk with God and in your journey if you're aspiring to be on YouTube and everything like that. But it was an example of how every person is born into sin. So let's just say you had a baking pan and you were going to make cakes for the people that were in your house or whatever, but this pan had a dent in it, like somebody punched a big dent into the pan. So when you pour your batter or whatever you're pouring into the pan, that it's going to form inside of that dent. So every cake that comes out of that pan is going to have that form of that dent in it. And because of the sin of Adam and Eve, we all have a dent in our lives. We all have a dent in our spirits that takes us out of the presence of God. So just as an example, you can look at it that way, that every human being after that point had a dent into their lives. Every human being after that point, besides Jesus Christ, had that dent in their lives where they were separated from the presence of God. So we have to want to fix that dent so that the people around us can be fed the right way, so that they won't have a dent in their cake, so that we can allow the Spirit of God to use us to spread his gospel to those around us. The next thing we want to talk about in that section is the curse that came with it. So we know that the woman was cursed because of her disobedience. Also the serpent. So the serpent was cursed first. It says in verse 14, then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all animals, domestic and wild. You will crawl on your belly, groveling in the dust as long as you live. And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head and you will strike his heel. So in that you see and understand that serpents were probably one of the top in the food chain before the fall of Adam and Eve and before their cursing, because it says you will crawl on your belly, groveling in the dust as long as you live. So they were probably walking. So we can just imagine a walking snake, and pretty much that's like a dragon. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like the prehistoric dragons, or what we imagine as dragons. That's what snakes were at that time. They were walking around on feet. So we kind of thank God for that curse. I don't think we would want to deal with that. So then it says in verse 16, then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. So that's the curse of the woman, that she will desire to rule over the husband, but he will rule over her. So a lot of times you see that, and I know this is a touchy subject, but we have a lot of women who desire to be domineering over their husbands. They desire to be the head of the house, which is not the way God intended it to be. And then it says, and to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow you will have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. So And for the men, he didn't necessarily curse the men specifically, but he cursed the ground, knowing that the men were going to have to tend to it. So that's why it's so hard. That's why, especially for men, it seems so hard to make a living. It seems so hard that we have to work so hard and we still don't get the love and appreciation that we feel we deserve. A lot of times you hear men complaining about that, but it's because of the fall of Adam and Eve. It's because of that fall that the ground was cursed, and we have to work so hard to maintain a good lifestyle, work so hard to maintain a decent lifestyle, a decent living. So all of these things came on by the curse of Adam and Eve.